Thanks for listening to this episode of History's Greatest Battles. If you enjoy this episode or the podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. When Alexander the Great lay on his deathbed, he said, and perhaps this is apocryphal, at least it's in the veins of legend, he said, "The empire will go to the strongest." A statement that ended up ripping his empire apart from the inside. But when something falls from the inside out, it requires men of immense talent and immense skill to gut an empire, just as much as to build one. These men of Alexander did both. Let's now experience Antigonus' fall at the Battle of Ipsus.
Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 38, The Battle of Ipsus, 310 BC. Antigonus' forces, roughly 70,000 infantry, 10,000 heavy cavalry, and 75 war elephants. Combined Allied forces, 64,000 infantry, 15,000 light cavalry, and 400 war elephants. Ipsus marked the zenith of the titanic struggle between Alexander the Great's successors, each vying to forge a vast Hellenistic empire that could unite the known world. At the center of this ambition stood Antigonus, whose towering dreams of empire crumbled in the dust of that battlefield, leaving him the last to fall short of creating the enduring international dominion he so fiercely sought.
As Alexander the Great lay dying in June of 323 BC, the shadow of death closing in on the most powerful man on earth at the time, a loyal subordinate dared to ask who would inherit his vast empire. With his final breaths, Alexander's answer was not the name of a chosen heir, but a challenge, uttered like a command from a god, quote, "to the strongest," end quote. The vastness of Alexander's empire, stretching from Greece to the very edges of India, was a monument to his unmatched ambition and his military brilliance. But such a dominion could only be held by a man as relentless and visionary as Alexander himself, a rare breed, towering above most men in history. Alexander left behind only a feeble infant, too weak to hold the weight of an empire, and within a short time, both the child and his mother, Roxanne, were ruthlessly slain. With the bloodline severed, the struggle began, a brutal contest to see which of Alexander's war-hardened generals would emerge as the strongest to seize the throne. 4 formidable men rose swiftly from the ranks of Alexander's lieutenants. In Egypt, Ptolemy, the shrewd governor, stood with the vast riches of the Nile at his command. Golden grain flowed through his hands, the lifeblood for hiring the ironclad Macedonian warriors, the backbone of any true army of the time. Ptolemy had another prize, Alexander's own body, snatched through cunning and brought to rest at the shrine of Amun, where the fallen king had once been proclaimed divine. Yet for all his cleverness, Ptolemy lacked the iron nerve to stake everything in a single roll of the dice, the kind of daring required to seize an empire. In Macedon, Antipater had been entrusted with the homeland, holding Greece in check while Alexander carved out his conquests. But Antipater soon met his end, passing the reins of power to his son, Cassander, a man ready to wield his father's legacy. Cassander had a grip on the young Alexander IV, the nephew of the fallen conqueror, yet both the boy and the throne were fragile. The might of Macedon had been drained by years of relentless warfare, its wealth and soldiers siphoned away to fuel Alexander's insatiable ambition. To the east stood Seleucus, a man who had carved out his power in Babylon, where the untold riches of the once mighty Persian Empire lay at his feet, plundered and ready for his use. He was the last of the great contenders to rise, but with the vastness of Asia beneath him, he commanded more land than any of his rivals, a fragile and a dangerous advantage. The final challenger was Antigonus, known as the One-Eyed, a veteran general who had fought at Alexander's side. His domain lay in the heart of the conflict in Asia Minor, caught between the territories of his foes. When Alexander solidified his hold over Asia Minor, he entrusted Antigonus with its governance while he pressed forward into the blood-drenched sands of Egypt and Persia, adding new crowns to his legacy. Among all the claimants to Alexander's legacy, Antigonus possessed the crucial blend of military prowess, wealth, and raw ambition. His position at the empire's heart was both a weapon and a snare. He could strike each rival one by one, should skill and fortune favor him, or risk being crushed if his enemies found a way to unite against him. Among the successors, called the Diadochi, Antigonus was the man to defeat. The battle for supremacy would rage for 15 brutal years with no mercy and no respite. To follow the tangled path leading to the final confrontation at Ipsus would be an entire season in itself. But what matters, for our sake, is that after 316 BC, Antigonus found himself under relentless assault, besieged by an alliance forged by his three greatest enemies. In the spring of 316, Antigonus triumphed at the Battle of Gabiene near Susa in the burning plains of southwest Iran. His victory shattered Eumenes, the chancellor of Macedon, giving Antigonus command over the hardened Macedonian veterans and removing a dangerous adversary who had ruled the upper reaches of Asia Minor. The spoils included Eumenes' treasury, a fortune to fuel his relentless campaign. Now, Antigonus stood at the helm of a formidable, battle-tested army, a vast stretch of territory, and coffers overflowing with wealth. His aggressive posture sent Seleucus scrambling to Ptolemy for protection, and so the coalition against Antigonus began to take shape. When word of Antigonus' rising threat reached Ptolemy, he wasted no time. Messages flew to Cassander in Macedon and Lysimachus in Thrace, calling them to arms against the looming danger from Asia Minor. By 315, Antigonus issued a demand for an armistice, seeking to freeze the battlefield in his favor. Such a move would have left his enemies isolated, Ptolemy trapped in Egypt, Cassander in Macedon, while Antigonus ruled nearly everything else. The reply was defiance. His rivals demanded a fair share of Alexander's empire, and in that moment, Antigonus transformed into a threat too great to ignore. The alliance against him was born in fire and ambition. For the next 14 years, the balance of power shifted like tides. Each man tasted victory, only to have it snatched away, while alliances of convenience often crumbled under the weight of their ambitions. They circled one another like predators, each seeking the killing blow, but none could strike hard enough to finish the fight. The struggle unfolded across the Western world, from the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean through the battlegrounds of Asia Minor, across Greece, and into the scattered islands of the Aegean. It was not just fought on land, but also at sea, where fleets clashed, but no single commander could seize control of the vital waterways. In this long and grinding contest, Antigonus had at his side his son Demetrius, a commander of extraordinary valor but unpredictable temperament. In moments of battle, Demetrius could shine with brilliance that seemed to rival his father's, but too often, his focus narrowed, his vision clouded by obsession with single objectives. He was both the sharpest weapon in Antigonus' arsenal and, at times, his gravest weakness. In 306, Demetrius crushed Ptolemy's fleet in a decisive engagement off Salamis in Cyprus, securing control over the islands and the coastlines of the eastern Mediterranean for Antigonus. Emboldened by this triumph, Antigonus proclaimed himself king, demanding that his rivals recognize his claim to the throne, a declaration that would cement his claim to Alexander's mantle as the supreme ruler of the empire. Ptolemy swiftly countered by crowning himself king of Egypt, and with cunning diplomacy urged Cassander, Lysimachus, and Seleucus to do the same in their own territories. In this act of rebellion, they collectively signaled that Alexander's once unified empire was no more, divided now into fractured kingdoms. As each of the great rivals followed Ptolemy's lead, it became clear that Alexander's empire could only endure in one form, under Antigonus' sole dominion. He was the last hope for preserving the unity of what had once been the world's greatest conquest. In this pivotal moment, Antigonus should have unleashed a series of crushing campaigns, eliminating his rivals one by one. He attempted this by marching into Egypt, seeking to topple Ptolemy, but the fates turned against him. Fierce storms lashed his army, while Ptolemy's wealth flowed, buying off the loyalty of his invaders. The invasion faltered before it could even really begin. Rather than regroup and strike at his other enemies, Antigonus turned his gaze toward Rhodes, dispatching Demetrius to seize the island and bolster their naval might. But Demetrius miscalculated, pressing the Rhodians with excessive demands. Instead of bending to his will, they fortified their city, readying themselves for a prolonged siege. For a year, from 305 to 304, Demetrius battered the walls of Rhodes in a drawn-out siege that yielded little in the way of victory. Meanwhile, the other successors seized the opportunity to unite against Antigonus, plotting his downfall as he wasted time and resources on the island. Seeing the futility of the siege, Antigonus recalled Demetrius and sent him to Greece to reassert control. There, Demetrius struck hard, delivering a crushing blow to Cassander's forces, forcing the Macedonian ruler to plead for peace with Antigonus. But Antigonus was not content with Cassander's surrender. Sensing weakness, he sought the final lethal strike. Faced with annihilation, Cassander had no choice but to call upon Ptolemy and Seleucus for aid, igniting the flames of a renewed alliance. By 302, the allied forces of Ptolemy, Seleucus, Cassander, and Lysimachus launched a concerted, all-out assault against Antigonus. Until now, their efforts had merely chipped away at his power, but this time, they aimed for the heart. That year, Lysimachus of Thrace, bolstered by reinforcements from Cassander, led an invasion into Asia Minor. City after city, once loyal to Antigonus, fell under his relentless advance. Antigonus, sensing the growing danger, summoned Demetrius from Greece, where his son had Cassander locked in his grasp. Rather than delivering the final blow, Demetrius obeyed, agreeing to a truce and sailing swiftly to Ionia to reinforce his father. Cassander, desperate to keep the pressure on, sent further reinforcements to Lysimachus. Meanwhile, Demetrius swept through the Ionian coast like a storm, crushing resistance and reasserting his father's control over the region. As Antigonus laid the foundations of his grand new capital, Antigonia, on the Orontes River in Syria, word of the invasion reached him. Without hesitation, the old general abandoned his plans and marched his troops to face the looming danger head-on. As Demetrius advanced towards Byzantium, Antigonus hunted down Lysimachus, pinning him at the town of Dorylium. Lysimachus had fortified his position, forcing Antigonus into a protracted siege, but after weeks of tense maneuvering, Lysimachus slipped through Antigonus's grasp and retreated north, setting up another formidable defense. With winter's chill creeping in, Lysimachus retreated further into northern Asia Minor to regroup, his forces taking shelter in their winter quarters. Antigonus withdrew to Dorylaeum, while Demetrius established his camp near the strategic waters of the Hellespont. As winter descended, Seleucus arrived from Babylon, his army settling east of Ankara. Ptolemy too had marched north from Egypt, ready to join the fray, but a deceptive rumor of Antigonus's victory sent him scurrying back to Egypt, abandoning the campaign for the moment. By the spring of 302, the stage was set for a massive collision. Demetrius marched to Dorylaeum, reuniting with his father's forces, while Lysimachus and Seleucus gathered their armies near Ankara, preparing for the decisive battle to come. On the open plains near Ipsus, where the ancient Persian royal road met the north-south route between Dorylaeum and Sanada, the two great armies would soon clash. Today this is known as modern Sipsin, but then it was a field ready to be drenched in the blood of kings. Antigonus marched to Ipsus with an immense army, 70,000 hardened infantry, 10,000 of the finest heavy Macedonian cavalry, and a fearsome force of 75 war elephants. His enemies stood against him with 64,000 infantry, 15,000 light cavalry, nimble and swift, but more suited for hit-and-run tactics than full-scale charges. Yet Seleucus had a trump card: 400 massive war elephants, a gift from the Indian king Chandragupta, a formidable force that could turn the tide of battle. The exact details of Ipsus are unfortunately lost to history, but Plutarch's Lives offers glimpses of what unfolded. Both armies arranged their infantry in rigid phalanx formations at the center. Antigonus, trusting his son, placed Demetrius at the head of his heavy cavalry on one wing, while lighter cavalry lingered on the opposite flank. Across from Demetrius, the bulk of Seleucus's cavalry awaited, poised for a vicious engagement. Antigonus deployed his war elephants in a menacing line across his front, while Lysimachus countered with 100 of his own, standing as a living barricade before his troops. Meanwhile, Seleucus held his remaining 300 elephants in reserve, a brutal surprise waiting in the rear. Antigonus's strategy was clear. Demetrius and his heavy cavalry would shatter the Seleucid cavalry on one flank, then swing inward, striking at the vulnerable rear of the enemy infantry. With Antigonus's phalanx pushing forward, the infantry would serve as an anvil, and Demetrius's cavalry, the hammer that would crush the enemy between them. The battle began in Antigonus's favor. Demetrius charged with thunderous force, driving the allied cavalry from the field. Whether this retreat was genuine or deliberate ruse is still debated, but it served the allies' designs perfectly. Drunk on the thrill of victory, Demetrius gave chase, pursuing the fleeing cavalry far beyond the battlefield. In doing so, he removed himself from the fight, leaving Antigonus exposed. Seizing the moment, Seleucus unleashed his reserve elephants, positioning them as a wall behind his infantry, ensuring that even if Demetrius returned, he would find no way through. With Demetrius gone, the light cavalry of the allies moved swiftly, harassing Antigonus's phalanx from the flanks and the rear, unleashing a deadly rain of arrows upon the packed ranks. In the midst of the chaos, the elephant lines clashed, and it was Lysimachus who emerged victorious, his beasts driving back Antigonus's war elephants. Under the relentless storm of arrows and the unyielding advance of Lysimachus's infantry, the morale of Antigonus's men crumbled. Some surrendered where they stood, while the rest broke and fled, their spirits shattered. Antigonus, still believing that Demetrius would return and save him, refused to retreat. At 81 years old, he had already made his decision: victory or death. And death it was. As his army disintegrated around him, Antigonus fought to the bitter end. Demetrius, however, did not return. Upon hearing of his father's defeat, he led the remnants of his force, 4,000 cavalry and 5,000 infantry, back to Ephesus. As Billows records, the Battle of Ipsus was a turning point in history. A decisive moment for Antigonus and Demetrius would have enabled Antigonus to recover control over such of the upper satrapies as he wished, and Cassandros, a great part of whose army fought at Ipsus, would not have had sufficient strength to withstand a new assault on Macedon. Only Ptolemy would have been left of Antigonus's enemies, and he could have been dealt with at leisure." End quote. Yet this vision hinged on one undeniable fact. Antigonus, at 81 years old, was nearing the end of his days. The empire's future rested precariously on the lifespan of a man who had already defied time but could not conquer it. Demetrius, destined to inherit his father's ambitions, lacked the steady hand and iron will needed to hold such an empire together. His brilliance on the battlefield was undeniable, but his inconsistency was his downfall, a fatal flaw in a game where only the most unyielding could prevail. Yet with the immense wealth and land of Asia Minor, the Levant, and Persia at their disposal, neither Cassander nor Ptolemy would have been able to mount a serious challenge against the might of Antigonus or his son had victory at Ipsus gone their way. Had the stars aligned differently, the Alexandrian Empire might have been reborn, with Antigonus at its helm. But the outcome at Ipsus shattered that possibility. The rival monarchies, declared in 305 BC, succeeded in Ptolemy's grand design. The empire was fractured, splintered beyond repair. History often paints Antigonus as little more than a failure, a man who lost his final battle and saw his dream crumble into dust. But such a verdict overlooks the empire he once commanded and the vision that, for a time, brought the world to his feet. In truth, Antigonus's legacy ran far deeper. His rule over Asia Minor and the Levant laid the foundations of a bureaucracy that outlasted him by centuries. Had he triumphed, his empire would have been anchored not in the distant reaches of Persia like Alexander's, but in the more strategically positioned heart of Syria, a power center far more capable of directing the flow of events across the ancient world. Antigonus also spearheaded a sweeping colonization campaign, planting the seeds of cities that would thrive across Western Asia, lasting monuments to his vision. By declaring himself king despite his humble origins, Antigonus forged a new concept of monarchy, one that would endure. The people of Greece even raised him to the status of a god, a divine honor previously reserved only for Alexander himself. In this act, Antigonus laid the bedrock for the doctrine of the divine right of kings, a belief that would ripple through the corridors of power for the next 2,000 years. As Rome embarked on its steady ascent to dominance, a unified and powerful state in the eastern Mediterranean led by Antigonus could have posed a formidable obstacle to the ambitions of the Roman Republic. Instead, Seleucus founded a fleeting empire rooted in Persia, only to see it crumble to the Parthians. His hopes of extending his power to Macedon were dashed after he vanquished Lysimachus in 283. For in 280, Ptolemy Ceraunus, the son of the original Ptolemy, ended Seleucus's life with a well-placed assassin's blade. And so, the eastern Mediterranean and Persia splintered into rival kingdoms, none strong enough to withstand the inevitable advance of Roman power, the empire that would soon sweep across the known world.